Good evening. I'm Marilyn Kushner, Curator and Head of the Department of Prints, Photographs, and Architectural Collections at the New York Historical Society, and I'm joined by Debra Schmidt Bach, Curator of Decorative Arts and Special Exhibitions. Before we begin tonight's discussion, I would like to thank our trustees, our Chairman's Council, and all of our members and other generous donors. Your support allows New York Historical to continue to pursue our mission. The New York Historical Society is currently open on Wednesday through Sunday, so please reserve your timed entry tickets on our website. Our program will last approximately 45 minutes, including 15 minutes for questions and answers at the end. You can submit your questions through the Q&A function on your Zoom screen at any point during the presentation. We have disabled the chat function, so please do make sure to use the Q&A. After the presentation, we will get to as many questions as time allows. Thank you. When Winold Reiss, 1886 to 1953, both embraced and shaped modern New York, a German immigrant, he arrived in 1913 just after the groundbreaking Armory show had shaken the staid American art scene. Over the succeeding 4 decades, his sleek design suffused the urban scene, from its restaurants and hotel interiors to its furniture and magazines. Steeped in the late 19th century German academic art tradition, Reiss was trained by proponents of the new expressionist style and bold use of color popular in Europe in the early 20th century. He embraced all forms of art, pouring his creativity into graphic design, printmaking, illustration, and handicraft, as he did with easel painting. Reiss's modernism strained at times against the status quo. He thrilled in the city's diversity and produced sensitive portraits that pushed individuals of color from the margins to the center of the modern urban world. At the same time, he featured indigenous and African art forms and faces in his designs for upscale restaurants, which largely shunned people of color. Winold Reiss, an immigrant modernist, understands the complex modernity of Reiss's art as a mirror to the complex modernity of an ever-evolving New York. It journeys into this modernity and into the artist's abiding belief in the potential of art to mold a modern world. Can I have the next slide, please? Reiss came to America for a number of reasons. Growing up with the youthful German fascination with American cowboys and Indians, he wanted to see the Indians whom he thought would be walking in the streets of New York City. It would take him until 1920 to go out west to Montana to meet the people of the Blackfoot Nation. He also wanted to bring European modernism to America, and to that end, he carried with him a number of rolled up works, including the 3 on this slide. He visited an exhibition on American art at the National Academy of Design shortly after arriving in New York City in 1913, and lamented to his wife that the work was, quote, like Germany 60 years ago, end quote. He observed that expressionism is lacking and pronounced the work all just dead merchandise. While most American artists were painting in a realistic style with subdued color palettes, Reiss's compositions brimmed with expressionism and color. He applied this modernist aesthetic across media, from painting and furniture to graphic and interior design. He also disseminated the same bold sensibility through his teachings. And here I show you the 3 of the pieces that he brought with him, and compare it with the John Sloan self-portrait in the lower right-hand corner. John Sloan was a major artist in the Ashcan School, which was a very important stage of American art in the early 20th century. But you can see how different the colors were and the expressionism was between what Winold Reiss saw when he came here, such as those paintings of the Ashcan School, and what he brought with him. Next slide, please.
Okay, so many of the works in this slide are shown in the exhibition's first gallery, which focuses on the ways in which Reiss brought modernism to the United States. So several of the works that you see on this slide, including the decorative bird panel and the sideboard design at the center, were probably done by Winold in Germany and brought with him, along with the paintings, to the United States when he arrived in New York in 1913. These early works include many of the colors and forms and various motifs that Reiss became acquainted with while studying in Munich, but also during his youth and his forays with his father into the Black Forest area. European modernist design movements like the Wiener Werkstätte in Austria or the Munich Secession in Germany championed folkloric motifs, colors, and construction. And these are all characteristics that are visible in the artifacts that you're seeing here. The bird panel at the top left, for example, shows Winold's favorite color palette. It has vivid cobalt blue, cadmium red and yellow, and a really bright turquoise. And these are realized as folkloric flowers, foliage, all surrounding a multicolored ringed pheasant. These types of motifs, often realized in painted colors, were very much characteristic of Black Forest folk art and craft. Reiss completed the study of the sideboard, which is in the center at the top, in Germany around or before 1912. The sideboard design here shows a straightforward yet imposing painted blue cabinet, embellished with bold, strappy iron hardware. This and the other early furniture studies in the exhibition, which include a rectilinear tall case clock and a bench chest, also call to mind the Art Nouveau furniture of Austrian architect Joseph Hoffmann, as well as the designs of Richard Riemerschmid and the handcraft aesthetic of the British arts and crafts movement. The peasant style chair that you also see toward the top left resembles very much painted Black Forest furniture, but it was also created by Winold during his first years in the United States. And I don't really think you need to be an expert on art or design to see the similarities and some of the commonalities between the motifs and the decorative bird panel and in that painted chair. Winold decorated chairs, cupboards, and tables with vibrant, contrasting colors and stylized plant and animal motifs. And this shaped rustic chair in cobalt and vermilion, vermilion red, is also decorated with bold folkloric flowers. This chair is actually part of a dining set that was from a breakfast nook that Reiss built for his West 16th Street studio during the early period after he arrived in New York. Other examples of Winold's earliest modern furniture created during his first year in New York include these wonderful dining chairs that you see at the top right. These were designed in 1914 for an apartment that the artist was readying in anticipation of the arrival of his wife and new baby. The ample rectilineal set that he designed, which is still used by the family, I must say, have a lot in common again with some of the early 20th century German design of Richard Riemerschmid. The dining set was very hefty, and he designed it and showed these sketches in a letter that we have in the exhibition from 1914. They include these throne-like chairs, both arm and side chairs, and the chairs are decorated and embellished with the scallop back slats and scallop decoration on the legs. Then lastly, on the bottom row toward the left, the image that you see, the drawing of the sofa, shows a sofa, a roomy sofa with two removable side tables. These were actually, this piece was actually designed by Winold for New York City apartment living. So it was a way to have furniture that was both interesting aesthetically, but also very practical as well. This piece of furniture was used, it was produced commercially and was used in some of Winold's other interior designs. Unlike the lamps in the sketches that you see next to it, those were, we don't know if those were ever produced. We can go to the next slide, please. So as we mentioned, Winold applied a modernist aesthetic to art, furniture, graphics, and interior design. And what you're seeing here is a photograph of his first interior and graphic identity project, which was for a shop or two shops, the Busy Lady Bakery shops at 3620 and 4620 Broadway, so Upper Broadway. As you see in this photograph, he enlivened the hygienic interior with a checkered mosaic floor and with walls festooned with foliate lunettes. And he used the geometric grids both on the floor in a very bold way, but they were also used to frame the wall decorations. These decorations really recall the architecture that he probably studied and observed during his training, particularly in Munich. But again, recall the designs of architect and designer Joseph Hoffman. Next to that, we're showing you a poster for a charity bazaar. Reiss's enthusiasm for poster art was ignited also during his years in Munich, but probably during his youth as well. And as he noted in his magazine, The Modern Art Collector, which published between 1915 and 1918, and I quote, "There isn't a good artist in Germany who wouldn't design a poster," end quote. So posters were designed in Germany and in Austria as part of commercial campaigns, marketing campaigns, and there was no separation in terms of artists who only worked on fine art versus designers who only worked on graphics. And so Winold too is an example of designers and artists who were versatile in both types of media. The poster is very boldly stylized, very similar to German and Austrian advertising posters, which were cornerstones of late 19th and early 20th century German and Austrian marketing campaigns. Some of the characteristics of these posters were that they featured central or dominant images depicted in fields of 3 or 4 colors, and also accented with patterns, decorative borders, and a minimum of text. This poster also expresses Winold's allegiance to both his native and adopted country and to Austria. So in this poster, he's shown a structure, a castle-like structure in the center, and it is surrounded by the flags of the United States, Germany, and Austria. Marilyn, do you want to say anything more about this poster? I know that this is one of your favorites.
Well, yeah, I wanted to say that, he obviously, he was a German in the US during World War I, and so quite clearly felt compassion for his homeland, and had actually at one point tried to go back and fight for the Germans. But he was told that the minute he left US shores, the Brits would pick him up and throw him in jail. So he didn't try to leave. By the time we got to the Second World War, he had already become an American citizen in the 1930s, and he was very pro-American in that. But in the First World War, he really did have sympathies towards his homeland. But you can see not only the flags of the countries, the colors of the flags of the countries in the center that were at this point involved in World War I. We had not entered yet, but the American flags on the side are represented as well. So he had that allegiance to all of these countries and must have really felt torn between everything that was going on at the time.
So before we move on to the next slide, I also want to note the drawing of the interior of the shop, which was from about 1920. As you can see, really does mimic some of the design techniques that were used in the Busy Lady Bakery Company interior and graphics as well. If we can move to the next slide, please. Speaking of graphics, among Winold's earliest work completed in the United States were designs for the graphic identities of his own studio and schools. The invitations, announcements, and letterheads that you're seeing in this slide really illustrate some of his earliest design identity projects, but also his design vocabulary. So at the top right, you're seeing an invitation to the Crafts and Art Studio opening, Art Studio Gallery opening. And you see two pooties who are holding these trailing, tumbling, stylized garlands, lots of scroll work, accenting and juxtaposing a wonderful deep purple with a beautiful green, and again, accenting with lots of gold. He loved using gold as an accent in all sorts of different types of media. The other thing that you're seeing on the bottom in the broadside and then in the piece at the bottom left are some of the different kinds of borders that he starts to use. So at the bottom left, you see both the sawtooth border, which will be used over and over again in a huge variety of works. And then you're also seeing Cubist-inspired borders that incorporate zigzags again, but also sort of Cubist-style masks and skyscrapers, reminiscent of the city skyline. We could go to the next slide, please.
Wait, just one moment, because
Okay.
Deborah, I just want to also point out that on the bottom left, you're going to see those motifs throughout his work in his paintings and in his prints and later drawings. So be on the lookout for that, and we'll see that in the next slide. Next. So you see that urban feeling in the cityscape on the right and the cityscape in the middle. But Reiss pictured the American world that he knew. And he spent many summers in Woodstock, New York, establishing a seasonal art school there with Henrietta, but returned to New York City after the heat of those hot months subsided. This imaginary vision on the left really reflects Reiss's grounding in a European system that stressed abstracted imagery accompanied by a forceful combination of colors, as Deborah's been discussing. I really think one feels the heat of the summer with the sun that looms over this landscape. His cityscapes, as I was saying before, mirrored his close association with urban life, where he was able to identify not only the vibrations and cacophony of the city, but also the moods of the neighborhoods populated by tall apartment buildings and wash hanging on lines strung up outside. You'll see these energetic depictions of urban life in a work on the next slide as well. And Deborah, turning it back to you.
Actually, the next slide, please. Okay. So I'm going to start us off on this one and then hand it over to Marilyn. At the top, you are seeing what's known as a wraparound book cover. It's something that we're probably very familiar with now. It wraps around an entire hardcover book. But when this was created by Reiss in the early period, when he was in New York, it was completely new. So his book jackets and magazine covers, he also did many magazine covers, incorporate the same bold aesthetics that he used in his posters. So this is a wraparound jacket for Frederick Palmer's The Last Shot, and it was one of the first wraparound covers. It presents a panoramic view, and as we saw in some of his graphics, you see armed soldiers, but they're really in silhouette. And they're marching under an ominously orange sky with warplanes and a dirigible in the background. It is, again, the style is very similar to German poster art, and something that you'll see over and over again in Winold's designs. And Marilyn, over to you.
Over to me. Well, as you see in the rooftops on the lower left, rooftops 1925, this was exactly the same time that he was working on Survey Graphic, which we'll get to in a minute, which was the Harlem issue of Survey Graphic that appeared in March of 1925. So you can see here, Winold really did capture the feeling of Harlem at this time with the important attention paid to jazz, and again, with the clothes hanging out to dry, but the cacophony of the city itself, if you look in the upper right-hand side, you'll see that same motif that we have seen in other works that Deborah has pointed out to us. Ebony and ivory in the middle is another book jacket that he designed. Again, he's still doing this in the 1920s. He's picking up on African motifs here. And this was for a very important book that was written at that time called Ebony and Ivory. And on the right, his graphic work and this drawing opus, which was done before 1942, he's sort of switched now. He's drawing on dark paper, but again, you see all of these same motifs in terms of what he's trying to depict in his images. Next slide, please. And this shows that there's something in this exhibition for everyone. This is a small child, full disclosure, my granddaughter, looking at the picture of Fred Fripp with his two grandchildren. And we did not do this purposely, but this painting with two children in it is hanging very close to the ground where little kids can see it, which now that I think about it, was a great idea. So next, please. Driven perhaps by his own outsider status as an immigrant to the US, Reiss reached toward what today we call social justice. During an era of legalized segregation, pervasive anti-Blackness and race-based anti-immigration policy and native dispossession, he celebrated individuals of color from across North America, including indigenous peoples, Harlem residents, and Asian immigrants. Reiss's bold portraits garnered him a commission in 1925 from Paul Kellogg, editor of the social reform journal Survey Graphic, to illustrate the special issue Harlem, Mecca of the New Negro. Reiss created a series of striking, highly individualized portraits that presented his subjects as embodiments of modernity. While the Harlem community welcomed Reiss's powerful expressions of Black achievement, the Midtown art establishment refused to show the work. The Harlem portraits portrayed here are displayed for their first time in a New York museum presentation, since they were shown at the 135th Street Harlem branch of the New York Public Library in 1925. And just to point out a few, I could say something about every one of these, but in the bottom, the second from the left is Dr. E.P. Roberts, which is now in the New York Historical Society collections. In 1894, Roberts became the first African-American in New York City to earn a medical degree. A graduate of what is now New York Medical College, he mentored younger generations of practitioners and became known as the Dean of Harlem Physicians. Reiss pictures Roberts without the tools of his trade in a portrait that might refer equally to his civic leadership. Roberts became a trustee of his alma mater, Lincoln University, served as the first Black member of the New York City Board of Education from 1917 to 1922, and was a charter member of the National Urban League. I also point out to you the painting, or the pastel, these are all pastels, the pastel of Elise Johnson McDougald up on the upper left, excuse me. And Alan Locke, who you see the second from the right, was the editor of this survey graphic issue. And he asked Elise Johnson McDougald to take Winold Reiss around Harlem and introduce him to all of the personalities so that he would have people to depict. So these are just a few of the portraits that he did for the survey graphic. Next slide, please. Like Reiss's Brahmadana, which you saw on the previous slide. Can you go back 1 second, please? And I'll show the Brahmadana. She's in the lower left. Okay, now next. This portrait, like the portrait of Fred Fripp, highlights familial bonds. Fripp holds his daughters in a gesture of both affection and protection. Reiss met Fripp on St. Helena Island in South Carolina, where Survey Graphics sent him on commission. He produced portraits of the island's Black residents, whose ancestors were among the last enslaved people forcefully removed from West Africa to the United States. Reiss captured the stout determination of the Mexicans of Aztec descent, which you see on the lower right. And he created this during his travels to Mexico in 1920. He was fascinated by Mexican culture and wrote that he bemoaned the fact of the Aztecs at the hands of the Spanish. Reiss spent weeks in Mexico, including 4 days in the town of Tepatitlán, painting portraits, an experience that he described as paradise. He wrote in his diary that it was a shame that the days went so quickly. I was just beginning to feel the magic that I had, and then I had to go. It was on this trip out west in 1920 that Reiss finally was able to meet with the Blackfoot Nation, and you can see on the bottom his portrait of Turtle, who became a very close friend of his. He painted any number of portraits of Turtle throughout the years that followed. And on the top right is a beautiful portrait of his son, Charik Reiss, which was done in about 1938. Next, please. Deborah, turning it to you.
Okay. So what you're seeing at the bottom on the left is a panel, a metal screen. Reiss, in addition to working in furniture, graphics, interior design, and also being a portraitist, was really very fond of working in a variety of materials, including metals. And so the panel that you're seeing is from the medieval grill dining restaurant from the hotel, from the Alamac Hotel, designed in 1923. The Hotel Alamac, their medieval grill restaurant, was included one of several of these panels that were used to decorate the interior. And this is something that you'll see again and again in Reiss's design. Metal becomes an important element, not just for exteriors, but to decorate interiors and various elements, used in the same way that fabric and painting would be used on walls. So this panel is very large. It's about 6 feet high, and it is made of a process that the artist called the Winold Reiss metal process. So what it was essentially was it is made of layers of fused and hammered panels of layered metals, including wrought iron, copper, brass, steel, and aluminum, and decorated with vitreous enamels to enliven its bas-relief. And this design, these medieval styled panels, were very much in keeping with the overall design of the restaurant. And you see a drawing next to it that I think Marilyn is going to tell you a little more about. The Alamac Hotel was located at Broadway and 71st Street, and it opened to great fanfare in 1923. Reiss designed guest rooms for the hotel, but also its 2 restaurants. And Marilyn, back to you.
Back to me. Well, Reiss designed, because he designed so many Longchamp's restaurants, he sort of knew what they wanted, what they expected from him, but every restaurant had a different theme. And so the medieval grill had the theme of obviously medieval times, but you can see in the top image, this is another bar study that he did of that had an association with French history. So all throughout his career, we can see that he goes from one Longchamps to the other, really adhering to the theme that he was asked to depict, but coming up with all of these wonderful different drawings and designs to accompany them. Next, please. Deborah, back to you.
Okay. In 1926, Reiss designed a 2-story Fifth Avenue apartment for Theodore Weicker, who was the co-founder of the Squibb Pharmaceutical Company. Most of the living areas were located on the entry level of the apartment. So his designs included a guest room, a music room, and then there was a rooftop garden as well. And we're showing you here a design of a library in this apartment. One of the remarkable things about his design for the apartment is that it incorporates metals in many different and interesting ways. And this is an example of Reiss's both enjoyment and love of different types of materials, including metals. He did many different kinds of work in metals, but also in general, working with different kinds of material, including new materials, like Formica and different kinds of man-made fabrics, but I'll tell you more about that in a moment. So for the Weicker apartment, though, incorporated into the design was beautiful custom-made metalwork. And the metalwork was used for gates and grills, but also for lighting fixtures, for different types of hallway furnishing, and as you're seeing here, for a radiator cover. So really a very unusual type of metalwork for this period, and really still today. We don't see a lot of beautiful metalwork like this in interior design. Beneath that, we're showing you one sketch from the Shell Ball apartment lobby. So at the height of the Art Deco craze, Reiss designed the interiors for the Shell Ball apartments in Kew Gardens, Queens. Like the Weicker apartment, the Shell Ball interior featured outstanding metalwork, as well as sometimes surprising color combinations. So in addition, he also used some of the furnishings that he had designed in these interiors as well. So in the lobby sketch that you're seeing here, you see green walls paired with a light salmon color as well, and then accented with both black and gold. And the apartment was, the interiors were very eye-catching, and he really caught the attention of critics as well, and really received favorable reviews in a number of architectural trade magazines. And also the other types of material that he was using include Formica for tables for restaurants, as well as man-made fabrics by DuPont, like Fabricoid, which was a leather-like fabric that was initially used in railroad cars and for automobile interiors. But under Winold's watchful eye, he used the material for restaurant banquettes and occasionally for wall coverings as well. So materials that we normally may turn our noses to during this period in our own day were exciting and new and presented many, many possibilities to Reiss. Marilyn, back to you.
Back to me. All right, the bottom three images are of the St. George Hotel in Brooklyn that were done. This redecoration that he did was accomplished in 1930. And at one point he wrote his son Chark and he said, I think I'm going to get a commission to work on a hotel where I'll be designing the public rooms and the guest rooms and the swimming pool and the great ballroom. And that obviously came to fruition and a reality for him. So on the bottom left, you see a photograph of the ballroom foyer. And please note that most of these things are now gone. We don't have very much of any of these designs left in the building. But he also talked to Chark about the fact that what they wanted him to do was do lighting that would change colors and would accent all different kinds of colors as the people desired for whatever event that was going on at the time. And that was one of the first uses of different color lights that were used in the country at the time. And again, on the bottom, you see the Egyptian motif. Once again, he's dealing with foreign cultures and relating to them, and is able to really express them and express the feeling of them in a wonderful way. Next, please. The next two slides illustrate some of those works in the last section of our exhibition. This mural was part of a series installed on the main floor of the cocktail lounge of the Longchamps restaurant near Times Square. The New York Times noted with great fanfare that the restaurant opened with business executives and celebrities of the stage and screen in attendance. The review further commented that the murals were dedicated to the 20th and 21st centuries, designed to show the city of the future. Reiss's imagined murals for this commission created powerful views of his interpretation of the next century, including the soaring skyscrapers defined by their overwhelming size. He did not, however, imagine the super talls or the mega tall buildings that we have today. This is a huge mural, 15 feet long, and we positioned it at the very end of the exhibition so that one might be able to get an idea of the expanse of this. If you notice, it had to be at one point cut in half so that it could be taken into a building where it was situated for quite a while. The next slide, please. Reiss designed both the exterior and the interior of the music hall at the 1939 World's Fair in Flushing Meadows, Queens. He collaborated on the exterior with his brother Hans, as well as architects Andrew Reinhardt and Henry Hofmeister. The exterior mural in mosaic, aluminum, and bronze rose 65 feet in height. It featured a goddess scattering musical notes that fall around a mask of tragedy. Here you see a postcard image of the music hall accompanied by a three-dimensional mock-up of the building's facade. And just as an aside, some of you may notice that the image of the mock-up has been inadvertently flipped. Not on purpose, but flipped nonetheless here for this presentation. Reiss's brilliantly colored interior, which seated more than 2,300 visitors, but for which there is not an extant photograph, included a ceiling painted in stepped up hues of blue, as well as seats upholstered in graduated shades from pink to orange to vermilion. So nothing would escape Reiss's very important intent on using color in every medium he worked in. So where do we go from here? Reiss painted his powerful City of the Future mural for Longchamps restaurant in Times Square in 1936, looking ahead to the 21st century. How do we in the 21st century assess the artist's legacy, looking back nearly a century later? Reiss's revolutionary interiors fell victim to the city's incessant renewal, and his portraits of people of color failed to gain the acceptance of the midstream art world, factors that long obscured his accomplishments. Yet his surviving work is a vivid testament of the fresh, bold sensibility that he brought to the art of his adopted country. Reiss's influence also reverberated through the art of many students he trained, such as the very famous Harlem Renaissance painter, Aaron Douglas. And so this exhibition is just the beginning of a new generation of Reiss studies. We look forward to others' research on the work of an important immigrant American modernist who made his mark on the arts here in the US. I'm convinced that there is plenty of research to come on the topic. So thank you, and I'm going to open it up now to Q&A. Okay. The first question is, could you talk a little bit about the process of putting the exhibition together? What goes into choosing the works, narrowing it down, deciding how to group works, and how the designers pull it all together visually inside the gallery? Well, this is something that we talk about a lot, isn't it, Deborah?
Yes,
I mean, we've been working on this for years. When I say 5 to 7 years, that really is not an exaggeration. And one of the first things we had to do was go and try to absorb all this. That took a very long time because a lot of this work and all of the archives are in New York State, but there's so much, and there's so much to absorb that if it hadn't been for not only the help of Renata Reiss, but also Ford Petrus and Jeffrey Stewart, both scholars that have been working on Reiss for years, for decades, I don't think we would have been able to do this. So this is a call out of a thank you to Ford and Jeffrey, and Deborah and I, and Renata. Deborah and I feel very indebted to them. But combing through all of these and looking at them and then making the decisions and then revising what we were going to do, because this was done in the time of COVID, which made it a little bit more difficult. We finally arrived at a checklist that we knew we could handle and that would fit in the space. And then we turned it over to our great designers, Gerhard Schlansky, Marcela Gonzalez, and Kira, who really are some of the most talented designers I've worked with. And they started to put it together with us. So it's a very long process. It is not just one or two curators working on something. It's as Hillary said, it takes a village. It really, or did Michelle say that? Well, anyway, it does take a lot of people to put together an exhibition such as this, and many years. Deborah?
Yeah, you know, we also had one advantage, which was that we were working on a catalog as well. So I have the catalog next to me at my desk. And so with working on the catalog, with the assistance of Renata Reiss and Ford and Jeffrey Stewart, we were able to focus in on some of the works that we felt would be the most important to show in New York. So part of our approach also was to think and talk about Winold's work and its relationship to New York and New York City. So that was one of the ways that we could guide ourselves, because it was really the first time that I saw the Reiss archives. I was really I was stunned, but also a bit overwhelmed because there are hundreds and hundreds of drawings and examples of his work and pieces of furniture and boxes and portraits. There's just so much there. And as Marilyn said, this is really, we're looking at this as the beginning, a new beginning of a conversation about the work of Winold Reiss. It's not the definitive conclusion by any means.
Well said, well said. And it goes on and on. Was the Busy Lady Baking Company located in Harlem? I guess that was the upper reach. Was that the upper reaches of Harlem? It wasn't, in the thick of Harlem. It was north of Harlem.
I thought it was Riverdale, but I might be wrong
Right.
about that. We
But
can,
I think
we
it's
can,
up
we
near
can
there.
find out and get back to answer that more definitively.
But it was not in the thick of Harlem where, and Winold spent a lot of time in Harlem in the mid 1920s and really became, I don't want to say one with Harlem, but as Ellen Locke once said, Winold Reiss was able to really get to the soul of the people in Harlem in a way that no other artist had been able to do until then. So he was very much a part of Harlem, but he was living a little bit north of Harlem at that time, with studios south of it. All right, did Reiss have any interactions with Augusta Savage, whose American Art Museum failed after a year? We don't have any indication of that yet, but one never knows what's still buried in the archives. I mean, somebody might discover that there was an association, which, I keep saying, there is so much material up there that waits to be discovered. So that's an interesting question, but we haven't seen any indication of that yet.
No, and I also want to just add very quickly that the archive also includes all the papers from his businesses. So that's another place where I think there's so much research to be done about who he was interacting with and his circle, both in New York City and upstate.
Okay, the next question is, where can we see murals in public buildings in NYC today? Are any still in existence? Now, I have two answers to this question. Number one, there's only one building in New York City right now that we know of that still stands with his design, and that's the Joyce Theater downtown. The interior has been totally redone, but the exterior is still Reiss's design. So that's the answer to your question. There's one public building in New York City. But in terms of the murals, he did some great mosaic murals that are in Cincinnati. They were originally in the Cincinnati Railroad Station, and now they've been relocated to the Cincinnati Airport. If we had done a major retrospective, we would have brought images in from that, but because we tried to concentrate on New York City, we couldn't start with the rest of the country. But again, that's more work that needs to be done, and that will be done, we hope. Anything to add to that, Debra, or should I go to the next question?
No, I think that you answered it very well.
Okay. Next question. How did you originally decide to focus on Winold Reiss? All right. The story is that I'll make it short. I'll try to make it short. I know somebody who planned to take a trip of people, a group of people up to upstate New York and see a collection. And one of the collections that they saw at that point was the Winold Reiss collection. And then that person who was the head of the library at that time, Michael Ryan, came back down to me. And he who was really a wonderful book person, not as much the visual arts, he showed me the materials and he said, look what I saw. Would you be interested in doing an exhibition? And I immediately said, absolutely, yes. I had never heard of Winold Reiss before. He was not in the canon, but I looked at those portraits and I looked at some of the things that Michael showed me and I said, this is it, we're going to have to do this. So that's how we decided to do an exhibition that will focus on him. And then it could not have been done without the support of a number of important people in the museum and without the go-ahead from the museum director and as obviously Margie Hofer and Louise Muir, who all supported us wholeheartedly in doing this show. So thank you to everybody who helped with that. All right, I think I have time for a few more questions. Who preserved the Reiss archive, his wife or himself? Did most of the works come from the archive? What were the other sources? the Reiss archive has been preserved by his daughter-in-law. And we did borrow a number of things from the archives, but we also borrowed from a number of other institutions and private collectors. So basically, the artwork came from all over the country. And where is the archive collection located? It's in the state of New York. So we were able to get there often, quite often. Okay, so I think we're going to wrap this up unless, Deborah, you have any other comments?
No, I just want to give a special thanks to Perry Wolfman, who from our AV team, and he ran this show for us. So thank you very much for that, Perry. And thank you for your time.
So we've really run out of time. We could have gone on with question after question. Thank you so much for your participation and for your exceptional support of the New York Historical Society. Debra and I hope that you can come and see the Art of Winold Reiss and Immigrant Modernist before it closes. We still have time on October 9th, 2022. So you can take your summer vacations and come back and see Winold. Please don't miss it. It's really, we think, a terrific exhibition.
Don't forget the catalog.
And the catalog, yes, and all of the things in the shop that are related to the exhibition, which are wonderful gift items that you could pick up as well. So thank you all so much, and come and see the show. It was a lot of fun to put together.